Welcome back to the Center for Critical and Cultural Theory. My name is Dr. Roger K. Green. This is a contextualized reading for Book 15 of Homer's Odyssey for our course, Homer and the Critique of Western Civilization. We left off Book 14 with Odysseus and the swineherd Eumaeus, who has given Odysseus disguised as a beggar shelter. And Eumaeus has gone off to tend the pigs throughout the night. Book 15 opens us back again to Lacedaemon, where Telemachus is preparing to sail home. He is with Menelaus and Helen. And Athena comes to Telemachus and says, "It's wrong, Telemachus, wrong to rove so far, so long from home, leaving your own holdings unprotected, crowds in your palace so brazen they'll carve up all your wealth, devour it all, and then your journey here will come to nothing. Quickly press Menelaus, lord of the war cry, to speed you home at once, if you want to find your irreproachable mother still inside your house." Even now her father and brothers urge Penelope to marry Eurymachus, who excels all other suitors at giving gifts and drives the bride price higher. She must not carry anything off against your will. You know how the heart of a woman always works. She likes to build the wealth of her new groom, of the sons she bore, of her dear departed husband, not a memory of the dead, no questions asked. So sail home, I say, with your own hands turn over all your goods into one serving woman you can trust the most, till the gods bring to light your own noble bride. And then she warns of an ambush that's about to take place for Telemachus. So this is an interesting passage here if we're thinking about things like gender critique. So first of all, it's Athena who's inspiring Telemachus to have these thoughts in his mind and sort of blaming the frailty of women, to use a kind of Shakespearean word there, frailty, thy name is woman. That Hamlet uses as he's considering his own mother. This idea, the heart of how the heart of a woman always works. She likes to build the wealth of her new groom, of the sons she bore, her dear departed husband, not a memory of the dead, no questions asked. And so this is this kind of emotion that's meant to give Telemachus rise to go back home. And then Telemachus wakes up from his dream and he wants to go right away, but Nestor's son says no, or Pisistratus, Nestor's son, says no, we can't go until morning, just wait until morning. And then morning arrives, and Telemachus asks leave of Menelaus. Menelaus, royal son of Atreus, captain of armies, let me go back to my own country now. The heart inside me longs for home at last. And Menelaus gives him leave, but of course, a lot happens before the leave. Balance is best in all things, says Menelaus. It's bad either way, spurring the stranger home who wants to linger, holding the one who longs to leave. Welcome the coming speed of the parting guest. But wait till I load your chariot down with gifts. Fine ones too, you'll see with your own eyes, and tell the maids to serve a meal at the hall. We have God's plenty here. It's an honor and glory to us, a help to you as well. So once again, servants, I'm always pointing out when servants are showing up or maids are doing their work. And Telemachus replies then to Menelaus and says, Menelaus, royal Atrides, captain of armies, I must go back to my home at once. When I started out, I left no one behind to guard my own possessions. God forbid, searching for my great father, I lose my life or lose some priceless treasure from my own house. And so, Menelaus is trying to get Telemachus to stay, but then Telemachus lets him know that it's urgent that he returns home. So this spurs Menelaus and Helen on to give gifts right away. Down Atrides walked to the storeroom filled with scent, and not alone Helen and Megapenthes, great thought is that name, went along, reaching the great spot where all of the heirlooms lay. Menelaus chose a generous two-handled cup. He told his son to take a mixing bowl, solid silver, while Helen lingered lingered beside the chests, and there they were, brocaded beautiful robes her own hands had woven. Queenly Helen, radiance of women, lifted one from the lot, the largest, loveliest robe. And so Helen gives Telemachus this bridal gown, basically for his future wife. Then Prince Pisistratus, taking the gifts, stowed them deep in the chariot cradle, and he viewed them with wonder, so that aesthetics of wonder is definitely present here. The red-haired warlord led them back to his house, and the guests took seats on low, high-backed chairs. A maid brought water soon in a graceful golden pitcher, and over a silver basin tipped it out so they might rinse their hands. And we see this a lot with servants sort of tipping out water to let the noble people wash their hands. She then pulled a gleaming table to their side. A state housekeeper brought on bread to serve them. So then they eat and drink, and then they finally say their goodbyes. And on their way back, just before they say their goodbyes here, Telemachus says he'll give good word to Nestor of everything that Menelaus says. If only I could find my father back at home. And right then we get these bird signs that show up. At his last words, a bird flew past on the right, and an eagle, clutching a huge white goose in its talons, plucked from the household yards. And all rushed after it, shouting, men and women. And swooping toward the chariot now, the bird veered off to the right before the horses. All looked up, and the people's spirits were lifted. And Helen comes, and she's going to read the signs. The bird signs. She says, listen to me, and I will be your prophet. Sure as the gods have flashed it in my mind, and it will come to pass. I know it will. Just as the eagle swooped down from the crags while it was born and bred, just as it snatched that goose fattened up for the kill inside the house, just so, after many trials and rovings long and hard, Odysseus will descend on his house and take revenge, unless he's home already, sowing the seeds of ruin for that whole crowd of suitors. So we see some foreshadowing. We also know this is going to happen. We've known it since basically the beginning of the text itself. And so everything is being set up in terms of the narrative unfolding for that to happen, but it's interesting how we see the mortals come in and read these signs of divine destiny. So the two boys leave, Telemachus and Pisistratus. They stay over one night, and we don't get much description of Diocles' halls, son of Ordilochus, son of the Alpheus River. He gave them a royal welcome, and then they go on. So we just don't get much about what happens there. And then Telemachus asks Pisistratus if he can go straight to his ships without going to see Nestor to say goodbye, because he wants to get home so badly. And the the tendency is going to be for them to have more meals, for Nestor to want to keep him there, to show him his hospitality. And Pisistratus thinks on this, and he knows that his father's going to fall into a rage if Telemachus leaves without saying goodbye, but he nevertheless honors Telemachus's wish. And so as he goes on, he just says to Telemachus, "Go right away, go, so that I'm not, you're gone by the time that my dad finds out." And so as they're getting ready to ship off, a fugitive shows up. And so we get this more and more throughout the text, this theme of strangers showing up. We know that Zeus is the god of strangers, that Xenia is the law of Zeus, that without a harbor strangers. And we've heard off and on throughout the text about people being sold, captured by pirates, sold as human trafficked slaves or servants into other places. And this fugitive shows up, and just as they're about to embark on their journey, and asks Telemachus for safe harbor. So he says that he's killed a man, right? And this is just after Telemachus has been praying too, as well. So there's an important sort of moment that he's been praying, and he's in that kind of space of having prayed to the gods. And so this fugitive shows up. He had killed a man. He was a prophet, sprung of Melampus's line of seers. Melampus, who lived in Pylos, mother of flocks, some years ago, rich among his Pylians, at home in his great high house. But then he was made to go abroad to foreign parts, fleeing his native land, and hot-blooded Neleus, most imperious man alive, who'd commandeered his vast estate and held it down by force for 1 entire year. That year Melampus, bound by cruel chains in the halls of Phylacus, suffered agonies, all for Neleus's daughter Pero, that had the mad spell of fury, murderous spirit cast upon his mind. But the seer worked free of death, and drove the lusty bellowing cattle out of the Phylace back to Pylos. There he avenged himself on Neleus for the shameful thing the king had done to him, and escorted Pero, the daughter again, home as his brother's bride. But he himself went off to a distant country, Argos, land of stallions, his destined home, where he would live and rule the Argive nation. So we've gotten quite a bit of background history. We're going to see that this is kind of an important person, this seer, right? Here he married a wife and built a high-roofed house, and sired Antiphades and Mantius, 2 staunch sons. Antiphades fathered Oicles, gallant heart. Oicles fathered Amphiaraus, driver of armies, whom storming Zeus and Apollo loved intensely, showering him with every form of kindness. But he never reached the threshold of old age. He died at Thebes, undone by a bribe his wife accepted, leaving behind 2 sons, Alcmaeon and Amphilochus. On his side, Mantius sired Polyphides and Clitus, both dawn of the golden throne whisked Clitus away, overwhelmed by his beauty. So the boy lived among the deathless gods. Yet Apollo made magnanimous Polyphides a prophet. After Amphiaraus's death, the greatest seer on earth. But a feud with his father drove him off to Hyperesia, where he made his home and prophesied to the world that this was the prophet's son. So we get this long genealogy, right, basically leading up to Theoclymenus. And so this, I think, as I was preparing for lectures, I was thinking about, the long genealogies that show up in the beginnings of the New Testament. So this is definitely a convention in the older world where we're tracing back stories to connect some sort of lineage. In the New Testament, it's trying to connect the birth of Jesus back to David, right? In the Old Testament. So Theoclymenus here has this long-rooted story that has its own mythology sort of built into it, or you can hear there's ring, like one brother's being taken off by the sun. So there's a lot of doubling, a lot of thematic stuff that we see in other stories as well, but we don't get too much more of that intertextuality in this particular text in the Odyssey. So then we get Theoclymenus addressing Telemachus. Friend, since I find you burning offerings here, I beg you by these rites and the God you pray to, then by your own life and the lives of all men who travel with you, tell me truly, don't hold back, who are you, where are you from, your city, your parents? And they're meeting out, in the world, right? And so they can address each other, I think, perhaps a little bit more directly. And Telemachus says, Ithaca is my country, Odysseus is my father. There was a man, or was he all a dream? But he's surely died a wretched death by now. So that kind of emotional, like, surely he's gone, but then hope sort of keeps moving on. That shift in emotional sway perpetuates the narrative itself. And Theoclymenus responds, just like you, I too have left my land, I because I killed a man of my own tribe. But he has many brothers and kin in Argos, stallion land, who rule the plains in force. Fleeing death at their hands, a dismal fate, I'm a fugitive now, doomed to walk across this mortal world. So take me aboard, hear a fugitive's prayer. Don't let them kill me, they're after me, well I know. And Telemachus, without really knowing any much of the background story, did he kill this person justly? Telemachus gives him sanctuary. And so this is going to be an important feature in the ancient world, harboring and giving sanctuary to fugitives from other places. So again, that kind of stuff shows up in the Old Testament in the Hebrew books, which I just don't have time or space to go into today, but I just want to mark the parallel, that there are rules for different cities that you can go to receive sanctuary if you are a fugitive. And that sort of stuff finds its way, yes, of course, into the ideals of international law later on, as that kind of apparatus emerges in the West. But in my country, in the United States, there has been, in the past decade or so, a lot of energy around influxes of borders, right? Of people at the borders. And this is happening in Europe too, especially as people from war-torn places around the world flood into Europe or flood into the United States. And with that, there's a kind of xenophobia that arises. But in many cases, people, at least on the southern border in the United States, who are fleeing very war-torn places like Honduras, which has recently been the murder capital of the world, people are seeking sanctuary. And so there's been this discussion of sanctuary cities, for example, in the United States. And for all of the defenders of Western civilization, those same defenders on the conservative side politically tend to be the people who want to keep foreigners out. They tend to want to find ways to build walls across the southern border and to not give sanctuary. And so I bring this up to say, if we're going to really claim these ideals and values of Western civilization, so much of this book, this text, is about how it is best to handle strangers and how that is part of God's law. And there's quite a bit of hypocrisy, I think, for those on the political right and extreme right wing in the United States, not only for the fact that they've forgotten that they're invaders themselves, that they're colonizers to the land that they squat in, that Native Americans have. Not only do they not give any kind of adherence to the treaties that the United States, once it became a government, had in relationship to all of those native peoples, each one of them being separate sovereign nations. So there's no attention to honoring treaties, no attention to people seeking sanctuary from different places, even when they're seeking sanctuary from places that the U.S. government and foreign policy has gone in and demolished intentionally, such as Guatemala in 1954, for example, where coups are spread around the rest of the world through things like the Monroe Doctrine, which was, had kind of faded to the background, but then was made more represented by the Trump administration in recent years. And Joe Biden is currently president right now, who said that he would take back away the Monroe Doctrine. And I'm not going to go into a big lecture on the Monroe Doctrine from 1823 right now. But this idea that the United States will kind of look after South and Central America like a kind of big brother. It is from that magnanimous gesture of the United States, that the political categorization of Latino and Latinx comes from in the 19th century. Because those people looked back to Europe and Rome to their origins, hence we get Latin, and they were compelled to do so because they did not want to align themselves with Big Brother up to the north, to the United States. Now, that isn't to say that Latino and Latinx people aren't people that, obviously look back to Europe, look back to Rome for their origins as well. And so the same sort of Western civilization narrative is going to show up for them as well. I'm situated in the United States, and so I'm giving a little bit more attention to current stuff here. So we see that through political turmoil that is rooted in foreign policies of different nation states, produces refugees. Refugees then come to the country that has produced the problem to begin with, and they are denied sanctuary by some on the political right. And this all is important because it's those folks who want to uphold a kind of version of white supremacy while claiming that they are upholding the values of Western civilization. So we need to call people, if you really are invested in books like this, the classics, we need to call people out on the ways that they pick and choose what they might value in terms of the idea of Western civilization. Back to the text here, Telemachus gives sanctuary, and then they cast off. There's a narrative shift back to Odysseus, and who is testing the swineherd Eumaeus over and over again. He's stretching Eumaeus to test how welcome Eumaeus is going to make him feel. Again, that theme of the stranger, right? And hospitality. Listen, Eumaeus, all you comrades, at the crack of dawn I mean to go to town and do my begging, not to be a drain on you and all your men, but advise me well, give me a trusty guide to see me there, and then I'm on my own to roam the streets. I have no choice, hoping to find a handout, just a crust or cupful. I'd really like to go to the house of King Odysseus and give my news to his cautious queen Penelope. Why, I'd even mix with those overweening suitors. Would they spare me a plateful? Look at all they have. I'd do good work for them, promptly anything they want. Let me tell you, listen closely, catch my drift. Thanks to Hermes, the guide, who gives all work to our hands, and grace and fame that it deserves. No one alive can match me at household chores. Building a good fire, splitting kindling neatly, carving, roasting meat, pouring rounds of wine, anything menials do to serve their noble masters. So he kind of says, yeah, I'll go as a beggar, but I'm looking for a job too. I can do any of these things. And Eumaeus, of course, like we can see that Odysseus has a lot of forethought here. He's planning his way to get into the suitors and back into his own household secretly. But Eumaeus, of course, is being tested, and he breaks in and says, "What's gone to your head? What a crazy plan! You must be hell-bent on destruction on the spot if you're keen to mingle with that mob of suitors. Their pride and violence hit the iron skies. They're a far cry from you, the men who do their bidding. Young bucks, all rigged out with their fine robes and shirts, hair sleeked down with oil, faces always beaming. The ones who slave for them, the tables polished, sagging under the bread and meat and wine." That's such a great image. The tables polished and sagging because there's so much on top of it. No, stay here. No one finds you a burden. Surely not I, not any comrade here. You wait till Odysseus' son comes back. That boy will deck you out with a cloak and a shirt and send you off wherever your heart desires. And so this has been the test, and Eumaeus always seems to pass the tests here. And then, so Odysseus stays, and then he uses this as an opportunity to ask about his father and his mother. And then Eumaeus says that his mother has died from grief. Now, we know earlier in the text, Odysseus has spoken to his mother in the underworld and knows that she died. But Eumaeus says she died of grief for her boy, her glorious boy. It wore her down, a wretched way to go. I pray that no one I love dies such a death. And then he says that even Odysseus, so he kind of positions himself as a kind of brother to Odysseus, almost an older brother, right? While she was alive, heartsick as she was, it always moved me to ask about her, learn the news. She'd reared me herself right beside her daughter, Ctymene, graceful girl with long, light brown hair, the youngest one she'd born. Just the two of us. And so he grows up alongside Odysseus' sister, but she not sold off. She goes off to marry someone, and he, as he comes of age, becomes a herd, but is decked out with a shirt and a cloak, and a good wrap and sandals, to go and then work among the herds. So there's love that the servant then has, of course, for the master's family here. Servants miss it, terribly gossiping back and forth with the mistress, gathering scraps of news, a snack and a cup or two, then taking home to the field some little gift. It never fails to cheer a servant's heart to hear about good things from the master's family. Imagine that, his canny master said, rather. You must have been just a little fellow, Eumaeus, when you were swept so far from home and parents. Come to tell me the whole story truly. Was your city sacked, or some city filled with people in wide streets where your father and mother made their home? Or were you all alone, herding your sheep and cattle when pirates kidnapped, shipped, and sold you off to this man's house, who paid a healthy price? My friend, and then we get, and this is a rare moment in the text, but we do get a servant's backstory from Eumaeus. Eumaeus tells the story how he came from a nice place, right? But he has been sold into slavery. He says, though over the years, a man finds solace even in old sorrows. True, a man who's weathered many blows and wandered many miles. My own story, this will answer your questions. And he tells of having a rather noble birth, But his own father kept a Phoenician woman as a slave in her house, or at least a servant. I don't know how much difference there's between slaves and servants here. Uh, Beautiful, tall, skilled at weaving lovely things, and her rascal countrymen lusted to seduce her, but she's been there helping to raise the young Eumaeus as a baby. And these other Phoenician sailors show up, and they convince her to betray her master for passage back home to the Phoenicians' land. But and she tells their story. She was captured by Taphian pirates, and so there's a lot of human trafficking that just shows up in the ancient world, right? Um, uh, and there's this warning. We see this as a theme throughout the text. Let none of your shipmates say a thing to me like out in the world. I'm going to go about my business, but I'll be doing something secretly for you. And then when night comes, I'm going to, says the Phoenician woman, I'm going to come to your ship, but I'm also going to bring the son of the king, right? This is Eumaeus. And so this is kind of payback for her being a servant, right? I'm nurse to my master's son in the palace now, such a precious toddler scampering round outside, always at my heels. I'll bring him aboard. Wherever you sell him off, whatever foreign parts, he'll fetch you quite a price. So princes are sold into slavery. Um, uh, and There is payback for these Phoenician men who take this woman onto their ship, and then they discard her. 6 whole days we sailed, 6 nights nonstop, and then when the god brought on the 7th day, Artemis, showering our arrows, came and shot the woman headfirst into the bilge. She splashed like a diving tern, and the crewmen heaved her body over, a nice treat for seals and fish, but left me alone, cowering, sick at heart, until at last the whirlwind and current bore us on to Ithaca, here where Laertes bought me with his wealth. So it's actually, of course, Odysseus's father who has bought Eumaeus. And so I first laid eyes on this good land. And so he's a toddler at the time. And funnily, I mean, Odysseus sort of recognizes this back history and says, this isn't life crazy, right? It's a fine life you lead, better than mine, says Odysseus, who's of course described as a beggar. Because he's drifted so far through the cities. And so there's some irony, I think, going on here as well. But also like a layer within that irony, this kind of layer of sincerity that Odysseus has traveled back and forth. He's faced all of these trials, but Eumaeus has had a rather steady existence as a servant, but as one who appears to be somewhat happy with his lot in life. Telemachus then gets home. We know that he's been warned by Athena, so he avoids the trap of the suitors that they've laid out for him. And Athena has told him, of course, to go straight to the swineherd's house. And when they arrive on the land at Ithaca, Theoclymenus then asks, where do I go, right? Because he's been the stranger guest, the fugitive, right? And Telemachus says, surely in better times I would invite you home. Our hospitality never fails, but now I fear it could only serve you poorly. I'll be away, a mother will never see you. She rarely appears these days. What with those suitors milling in the hall, she keeps it to her upper story, weaving at her loom. And at first, Telemachus tells him to visit Eurymachus. We've already heard Eurymachus is kind of, at least among the suitors, he's the best of them. Eurymachus, wise Polybus's fine, upstanding son, he's the man of the hour. Our island people look on him like a god, the prince of suitors, hottest to wed my mother, sees my father's powers. But God knows, Zeus up there in his bright Olympus, whether or not he before that wedding day arrives, he'll bring the day of death on all of their heads. And right then we get this other bird sign again, right? So it's definitely a theme in this chapter. This is the second time birds have shown up. And this one, a hawk, Apollo's wind-swift herald, tight in his claws a struggling dove, and he ripped its feathers out, and they drifted down to the earth between the ship and the young prince himself. And the prophet, of course, Theoclymenus, is going to interpret this. And he says, look, that just said that what you've said is going to happen, right? And so then they decide to send him somewhere, to send him somewhere else. And so Telemachus says to one of his men, Pyrrhus, son of Clydius, you are the one who's done my bidding more than all other friends who sailed with me to Pylos. Please take this guest of mine to your own house. Treat him kindly. Host him with all goodwill till I can come myself. And he says, of course, Telemachus, and he takes them. Takes Theoclymenus on, and then Telemachus goes on to meet the swineherd, where we know Odysseus is being harbored as well, although in disguise. And that'll take us to the end of book 15 of the Odyssey. As always, please, if you feel like you're getting something out of this for less than the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can support us on Patreon for the Center of Critical and Cultural Theory, so that I can keep doing various courses like this with other texts, bringing in recent scholarship as well, and trying to find ways that these important books in history might be read in our current times. Thanks very much for watching and listening, if you're listening on a podcast version of this, and have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. Thanks.